Hello, everyone. I'm Markala Wozniak. I'm the Communication Manager with Boulder County Elections. We'll give it another moment before we get started. Okay, folks, I'm going to get Molly on screen, the clerk and recorder, and I have her do some preliminary information and introductions. And then I'll pull her off screen and then we'll go into the presentation. Just a few ground rules. There's a Q&A functionality. I know it is available on your phones if you're looking at this on your phones. It's a little hard to find, but I know it's there if you keep looking. And also I know it's available on the computer as well. If you have questions as we're going, feel free to drop them in so you don't forget your questions. And depending on the question, it may make sense, and I'll try to pause Molly and have the question asked. Otherwise, we may try to get to those questions at the end. And thank you as well for everyone that dropped some questions in. We did take a look at those, and I think most of those are covered in the slides, but if not, we'll try to review those at the very end. So with that, we
Markala, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, great. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Molly Fitzpatrick, and I'm the Boulder County Clerk and Recorder, and I've been the Clerk and Recorder since 2019. And so tonight, what we'll be doing is talking about what happens to your ballot when it's returned back to our office for processing, and we'll also go through some common FAQs that we receive. So with that being said, I am going to hop off camera and we'll start the presentation. So a little bit about Boulder County voters. We have 228,000 active registered voters, and contrary to popular belief, we are a high unaffiliated county. More than any other political party, our voters are unaffiliated at 48%. After that, we have our Democrats at 39.4%, and then we have our Republicans at 10.5%. So that is the makeup of Boulder County voters. These voters come from the following jurisdictions, and the fun fact that we like to highlight is that Longmont surpassed Boulder a few years ago with more registered voters in early 2023. So previously Boulder, the city of Boulder had more voters than the rest of the county, and now it's Longmont. So go Longmont. This slide represents voter turnout over the last several years. Of course, we have higher turnout in general elections than we do in coordinated elections that happen on an odd year. And overall, what we would like to highlight is that Colorado has incredibly high turnout. Boulder County has incredibly high turnout, consistently some of the highest in the nation. The state that we typically fall behind is Minnesota. And so one of the things that we like to look at is, how accessible is the voting model, as well as what's on the ballot that could be ginning up turnout. And so those are some of the factors that lead to what I would say our high turnout is, especially our model that is so accessible, which we'll talk about the different features in just a second. So at a high level, here's our election calendar. While it's October 24th, we've already conducted lots of election activities. Our vote centers are open in Boulder County. They opened earlier this week, and we have been concurrently running ballot processing tours. So if you would like to see what happens to your ballot for when it's received back to our office, we'd love to have you on site so you can see that work in action. We will open up more we will open up more vote centers as time goes on. So we'll start with a smaller number and then just continually scale up until Election Day. Of course, we have Election Day on November 5th. All ballots must be received by 7 p.m. But after that, we do continue processing ballots for several days after Election Day. And that doesn't mean that anything's wrong with the ballots or the election. It means that we are taking our time to make sure that we are processing accurately. 8 days after the election is the deadline for military and overseas ballots to come into our office. And it's also the last day that voters have to cure their ballot envelope if there was an issue with it. We have a signature verification process in the state of Colorado that's really important. And if our election judges don't make a match between the way you signed your ballot envelope and previous signatures that we have on file for you, they'll temporarily reject that envelope, and we will reach out to you to try and get a corrected or try to confirm that it was you. And so those voters have until 8 days after the election. We'll also run our risk limiting audit between Election Day and certification, which happens at the very end of November. And that's a post-election audit to compare the physical paper ballots that voters voted against a report from the voting system that spells out how the voting system read your ballot at the time of scanning. And all of these processes are either you can watch them as a watcher that's appointed by a political party or issue committee, or you can come and observe them, and we would love to have you. So we'll go to the next slide. Okay, so when we talk about Colorado elections, Boulder County refers to our model as an all option state. Oftentimes we talk about where we hear Colorado referred to as a mail-in ballot state, but that really doesn't encompass what our model is, because voters have every option available to them to cast their vote. So what happens is that every active registered voter automatically gets a ballot in the mail. What they do with that ballot is their choice. They can mail it in using USPS. They can turn it into a secure 24-hour ballot drop box that's managed by the county, or they can just go in and vote if that's what they would like to do. If they go to vote in person, they can use accessible voting equipment, and many counties on the Front Range actually offer Spanish language ballots in person at vote centers. And we do have same-day voter registration, so voters can register to vote up to and including Election Day. A few features of our Colorado election model: we have same-day voter registration, so we do not have an arbitrary voter registration deadline anymore. We do vote on paper, which is really important, and more states than ever before have been moving towards paper, which is really important because it helps you audit the election outcomes. We also have cameras on our within our ballot processing center and on our drop boxes. Chain of custody requirements to understand when we take possession of ballots from voters. Bipartisan oversight throughout the entire process. And then signature verification to verify identity in a mail ballot state. And then we have our statewide risk limiting audit to verify paper ballots against the way the voting system read your ballot at the time of scanning. We have lots of partnerships throughout our work. Several years ago, elections was designated as critical infrastructure, which signaled both to the private and public sector that elections are a priority. And so there have been lots of resources provided to us from many groups. We work closely with the Colorado County Clerks Association. I'm actually the president of the association, to help all counties remain in coordination and communication with each other, share best practices. We also work very closely with the Colorado Secretary of State as well. So let's talk about what happens to your ballot. So at a very high level, we have very strict controls over ballot printing. And so what happens is we have a print vendor who prints all of Boulder County's ballots. And this print vendor, all they do is print ballots. They don't print any other type of mail. They are just an election vendor. And so we have them actually print our ballots. And then what they do is they actually print the ballots, and then they load them onto a truck, and the truck is sealed, and that truck is moved to the Denver General Mail Facility, and we are tracking that truck the whole time. And so we know if that truck's been stuck in traffic or if it runs into any issues. And so once the truck arrives to the Denver General Mail Facility, we do have a team member go to actually see how the truck gets unloaded. And we actually see the way that those ballots get unloaded off the truck and into the Denver Mail Facility. At that point is when the Denver Mail Facility and USPS takes possession of the ballots and they start delivering them to Boulder County voters. We do have technology that allows us to see the success of the delivery by zip code, and so we're looking at that all of the time. Then voters are receiving all of these ballots, and then they can return them in all of the ways that we talked about. One thing that we'll highlight is that if you are going to vote by mail, you need to turn in that ballot 8 days before Election Day, and that this year that's October 28th. And one thing we like to say is vote when you're most excited to vote, but if it's all the same to you, we love early voters because one, it ensures that nothing gets in your way when it comes to voting. And the other is because it helps us process ballots over a longer period of time. Okay, in the next couple of steps is going to go through what happens once you've returned your ballot back to our office. And you can come see these steps in action at About Processing Center tour. We would love to have you. So step one is that we receive your envelope and we prepare your envelope to be sorted and for the sorter machine to capture an image of your signature. And so that's what this equipment is doing, is it's sorting your ballot and it's ensuring that we're getting an image of your signature. We'll go to the next slide. Every single signature in Boulder County is reviewed by humans. And so these election judges are checking the signature on your envelope and they are comparing it to previous signatures that we have on file for you. If the judge is able to make a match on your signature, that's great. Your ballot is moved forward for processing. If the election judge is not able to immediately verify your signature, it gets escalated to tier 2. And that is when a Republican and a Democrat are looking at your signature together to determine if you signed that envelope. And if the judges determine that they can't make a match, you will be sent a temporary cure letter. And that cure letter essentially says, our election judges weren't able to determine your signature. Please respond to this letter and let us know that it was you. And so until the voter responds to our outreach, that ballot is held back from further processing. So if the ballot is signature verified, it will get moved forward for processing. And so that's what step 4 is. So at that point, we are sending the ballot forward to opening and separating. And we'll go to the next slide. So this is the point where your envelope is opened. And so we have equipment that slices open the top of your envelope. And then we have teams of judges who remove the ballot from your envelope. And when we are removing that ballot from the envelope, the voter's information on the envelope is facing down on the table, and that's how anonymity is preserved. So the bipartisan teams are removing the ballot from the envelope and they're flattening that ballot to be run through the scanner because, as you can imagine, it's been folded up in its ballot envelope for quite some time, so it needs to be flattened so it could be run through the scanner. They're also looking for anything that could damage our scanning equipment. And so if something could potentially damage our equipment, we will have a bipartisan team duplicate the damaged ballot onto a clean ballot that can be read through the voting system equipment. Only one ballot is run through, but that is how we ensure that only clean ballots are getting run through. So at the time of scanning, the ballots, we are scanning them in batches and votes are captured in the voting system. As ballots are getting scanned, there is a unique identifier added to the ballot. And the reason there's a unique identifier added to the ballot is so we can conduct our post-election risk limiting audit. And so we'll talk about that in a moment. But the big thing to note is that there is no identifier that ties a single ballot back to a voter. So Once the ballot is removed from its envelope, it's gone. We don't know whose ballot that is. Not even election officials know that. And so starting on election night, we will start posting results and we will start downloading the report from the voting system. And it's important to remember or to acknowledge, or for me to state, that the voting system is different than the system used to upload election results. So we will download a report from our voting system that is not connected to the internet. We will download that report onto a clean USB thumb drive, and we will move it over to equipment that is connected to the internet so we can upload results. So how do we validate the election? We test and test and test. The two big tests that we want to highlight is our logic and accuracy test beforehand, and that's when we are filling out test ballots. And those test ballots are filled out by bipartisan teams of election judges, as well as county staff, and we are filling those ballots out, and then we are hand marking how we filled out those ballots, and then those ballots are run through the voting system equipment. And this is the part of the process where we can tell you that the election is programmed correctly, the scanning equipment is operating correctly because of this test. And so again, to sum it up, election judges are filling out paper ballots, marking how they filled out those paper ballots. Then they are taking those paper ballots to the scan room equipment, running those ballots through the scanning equipment, downloading a report from the scanning equipment, and comparing that to the physical hand-marked paper ballots. After the election, but before we certify the election, is when we're doing the risk limiting audit. And so what this does is it compares the physical paper ballot that voters voted to what the scanner read and counted. So this is also completed by election judges, and this is a audit that every county in the state of Colorado does, unless you're such a small county that you're doing a hand count. So we do a risk limiting audit, which means we're sampling and auditing enough ballots to verify that the election outcome is correct. So signature verification, this is a really important part of a mail ballot election model. Yeah. Oh, you want me to answer the question in the chat?
Yeah, I had a question come up, so I'll go ahead and ask it here. So if you want to just talk a little bit about who works at the elections office to process these, tens of thousands of ballots. So are ballots processed by county employees or is it volunteers, and how does one become an election judge?
Great question. So to be an election judge at a high level, each political party is assigned and has the right to 50% of available positions. And so that means that the Republicans are entitled to 50% and the Democrats are entitled to 50%. And so the political party chairs give us a list of who they would like us to hire. And so we start with that list first, and we hire from that list, and we are never really able to hire fully off of their list alone. So then we start trying to hire other Republicans and other Democrats. If we cannot fill all of the available spots with registered people of that party, we do have the authority to backfill with unaffiliated and minor party folks, but we do try to hire equal number of Republicans and Democrats, but it is, quite frankly, harder in Boulder County to hire enough Republicans just because the numbers are a lot lower in our county, but we do our best to fill it with equal bipartisanship whenever possible. And those positions are paid. Okay, so going back to signature verification, this is an important part of the mail ballot election model. Election judges are trained using Secretary of State guidelines, and we also have in the past layered on additional training from handwriting experts to look for things that would signal that this is your signature. And so there are things that you're probably not even aware of that you do on a consistent basis in your signature that our election judges now know about your signature. So what they're doing is they're comparing the way you signed that physical envelope to previous signatures that we have on file for you. So you can imagine that if you're a voter who has voted for a long time, we have lots of signatures on file for you. If you're a newer voter, or maybe this is your first election, we have fewer signatures on file for us to look at. And so those signatures, again, are looked at by bipartisan teams of election judges and sometimes go through multiple layers of review. Okay, now we're getting to the Q&A. Are ballot drop boxes secure? Yes, ballot drop boxes are absolutely secure, and here's why. They are under 24-hour video surveillance during elections. They are also emptied by bipartisan teams who transport those ballots directly back to our ballot processing center. We also have chain of custody to ensure that we know who took possession of the ballots when, and we have this all documented electronically using ballot box tracking system, which is BBTS. And that has been a system that has been nationally recognized because of the electronic chain of custody versus being on paper. Okay, so another thing that we talk about is list maintenance and why our lists are accurate. So a few things, criteria for registering to vote. Same for voting. You have to be 18 years as of election day. You can actually be 16 or 17 in Colorado to pre-register to vote. So you're get a ballot for your first election when you're 18. U.S. citizen, and these requirements translate over to election voting as well. And so when you register to vote, you're affirming these qualifications. But then on top of that, we also are running checks on the voter registration rolls against different databases, which we'll get into in just a second. So we can go to the next slide. So how do we check voter registration? So a couple of different ways. We compare our voter rolls on a daily, weekly, or sometimes monthly basis against death records from the Department of Health and Environment, postal records to capture anybody that has moved, Department of Corrections for those involved in the criminal justice system, and then driver's license registration as well. We are also a member of ERIC, which is this multi-state program where states swap lists. So for multiple registrants across states or for anyone that might have voted in more than one state. So we're comparing our list with other states across the country. Another question that we get a lot is, do we have a problem with ballot harvesting? And a couple of things to note about this. When we say ballot harvesting, one thing to note is that anybody in Colorado can return up to 10 ballots per election, and that is legal. And the reason is because, there might be a very valid reason why you might want your ballot returned by somebody else. Let's say you're sick, ill, confined, and you want to give your ballot to someone that you trust to turn it in for you. That is permissible. Ballot Tracks is an important tool that we have because it is a system that will notify voters that we have received their ballot back to our office. And it is a system that will let voters know that we have signature verified their ballot or if there's an issue with a ballot. So if there has been some sort of interception of your ballot and someone has signed it and returned it, we would notify you as the owner of the ballot that we've received your ballot and that we've signature verified your ballot. And so that's something that voters would be calling about if they were getting these messages and they never actually turned in their ballot. So that's an important thing to think about, is the signature verification process and the ballot tracks notification. Okay, cybersecurity, we talk a lot about cybersecurity and we talk a lot about physical security, and it takes both of these things working together to make sure that our environment is very secure. And so we participate in a lot of training on cybersecurity. And so we're always looking at things like training our staff in phishing and spam emails. We're looking at things like AI, which is obviously a relatively new thing for a lot of election officials, and how to spot deep fakes or impersonation or misrepresentation videos. So we are just kind of looking at common threats all of the time and trying to ensure that our staff is aware of what these threats are and how they can protect our environment from being susceptible to these types of attacks. But cybersecurity is something that we've been working on for years and years now, and we have cybersecurity program and trainings and tools and technologies that help to keep our environment secure. Okay, so fighting mis and disinformation. So this is a really important aspect of our work now. We see our role as really providing accurate election information. We see ourselves as stewards of ensuring that our efforts or that our work is very transparent to the public. And so that's why we do presentations like these. It's why we do tours. It's why we encourage people to sign up to be watchers or election judges, so we can shed as much light on the process as possible, because we trust our process and we want you all to trust our process as well. So we find ourselves in the space of really trying to do a lot of outreach to make sure people understand what our process is about. And so for voters, we really encourage you all to follow official sources of accurate information. So that would be like our office, the Secretary of State's office. And if you ever see inaccurate information, or if you see information that feels inflammatory, the best thing you can do is ask questions and probe. You know, which state are we talking about? Are we talking about the voter registration system? Are we talking about the election night results reporting system? Are we talking about the voting system? Because those things are all very different. And we do have a hotline. So if you see something that, you know, doesn't seem right, you're always welcome to report it directly to our hotline. And, you know, for those who have friends and family members in other states and, you know, they may not trust the system there, please encourage them to reach out to their local election office to see if they have like a public tour or similar event that they could go to learn more about their elections process. Okay, so the last, maybe not the last, but one of the things that we wanted to talk about was the Know Your Voting Rights campaign. And so this is the campaign designed to support the diversity of experiences that we know voters have in Boulder County. So we have these materials in both English and Spanish, and it's really designed to support voters who might need language assistance or ADA accessible voting equipment, college students, you know, those involved in the criminal justice system. So kind of a one-stop shop for those voters who might have different barriers. So we have these posters throughout the community, and we'll keep building on this work over the next couple of years. And that's all we have. So here's some helpful links, and as well as, like I said, please follow us on our social media channels, and let us know if you have any questions. And like I said, please come to a ballot processing tour, and we'd love to see you in person. So with that being said, I will close and ask if anybody has any questions.
We'll give it a minute or two for folks to think of any questions and drop them into the chat. Just for folks' knowledge, our next tours are on Wednesday next week, and if you keep checking that, we might either add or additional tours. So I know some of them are near capacity, so we're doing our best to accommodate those, to make sure everyone can get in that would like to come. 30 more seconds or so for any more questions to drop in. And after this, we'll publish this webinar on our YouTube channel. And we have a second webinar on Monday. Some folks might already be registered for that. That one goes really deep into ballot processing and what to expect on election night and the days after, and how we maintain and how we process those overseas and military ballots and all those different things, the category pure ballots that come in. And that's really what that presentation is about. And it's really geared towards candidates so they can assess, and the press, so they can assess when there's a really close election, how to evaluate the results that are coming in. Okay, so I've got one question here, and thank you. What security is around receiving voted ballots from the post office?
So if a voter decides to mail their ballot back to our office using the post office, we will send a bipartisan courier team to collect those ballots from the post office to take chain of custody, and then those ballots will be transported back to our office for processing and follow the same steps. So that's how that process works. They are collected by a bipartisan team at the post office. And feel free to let me know if that did not answer your question.
Okay, I don't see any additional questions, so we'll go ahead and wrap up there, and hopefully we'll see some of you at the next ballot processing board next Wednesday or the following Saturday. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.